Well, good morning. Happy Sunday. Happy coffee with Dr. Childress this Sunday morning. So this morning I entitled my talk today, "What are you going to do?" Uh, that I could tell you all about the pathology. I can tell you ins and outs, everything in detail about what the pathology is. I can also tell you about how the broken mental health system is preventing any solution. The forensic psychologists are awful, and the clinical psychologists have abandoned you. And because the psychology system is so broken, the legal system, which depends on the psychology system for input, is also broken around this pathology. And I can describe all of that, the brokenness to you in detail. But what are you going to do about it? Today I want to talk about developing a plan. What are you going to do? So the first thing, let's get some terminology in line here. Diagnosis guides treatment. That's the fundamentals of clinical psychology, and we're gonna export the forensic psychologists. They're ignorant and incompetent. Forensic custody evaluations are a failed experiment in service delivery to a vulnerable population. So we're going to revisit the entire our mental health approach to risk management, because that risk management approach of giving your own special psychologists completely failed. So clinical psychologists cannot abandon you. We need to come back, and we need to make it safe, though, for the clinical psychologist to return, which is my role, essentially. I'm an old guy. I'm leaving a career. I'm not building a career. I'm senior staff, and I'm a clinical psychologist. So I have returned to court-involved custody conflict to set the path for other clinical psychologists to return and remain safe. Right now, though, I'm facing a lot of dangers from the forensic psychologists, from the licensing boards, which are controlled by the forensic psychologists, from opposing counsel in the legal system, from the pathology. So everybody wants to hurt me at this point, and damage me, because I'm helping to solve the pathology, and the pathology doesn't want that. But once I hopefully clear this little period here, um, where why am I getting attacked for trying to solve the pathology? Why aren't the things I'm saying starting to move within the mental health system? And so once we're into that zone, then things I anticipate will move a lot more quickly. Um, but in clinical psychologists, as clinical psychology returns to court-involved practice, diagnosis guides treatment. And forensic psychologists, they don't diagnose, they don't treat. They're pretty pointless and useless. We must first diagnose what the pathology is before we know how to treat it. We must first identify what the problem is before we know how to fix it. So those mean the same thing. So diagnosis means identify, pathology means problem, treatment means fix it. So you can use all those words interchangeably. And so just starting out, what are you going to do about the situation? Well, you have a problem. You have a pathology, and you're going to need to fix it. We're going to need treatment. And that's a fundamental ground that we're going to stand on just right off the bat, because the pathology wants to drive this into the legal system to put you on trial for being a bad parent, bad spouse. And the pathology's treatment plan is to eliminate the parent from the child's life. No, that's not treatment. That's called pathology. That's called attachment pathology. And we'll talk about that in a second. But that's not treatment. And so you want to get this out of the legal system over to the healthcare system, and you want treatment to fix the problem, fix the pathology. Now, before we can fix the pathology in your family, before we can treat the problem, um, we need to first identify what that problem is, diagnose what that problem is. Now, with severe attachment pathology, like a child rejecting a parent, there's only two possibilities when severe attachment pathology, because the attachment system's primary motivational system of the brain. It's strongly motivating the child to bond to the set goal, it's called, of the parent. And so um, the attachment system is strongly motivating the child to bond to the parent. So to overcome that and get a child who is severing the bond to the parent, that's abusive range parenting. Is the differential diagnosis on that? The question is which parent. And so we're in the legal system, and the legal system, has prosecution and defense. There's two sides to the legal system. And up until this point, though, there's been only one side of the psychology system because the forensic psychologists are ignorant like a rock. And there's actually two different possibilities on this. It's either child abuse somehow by the targeted rejected parent that's causing the child's attachment pathology towards that parent. And that's a two-person attribution of causality. And that's what everybody's been stuck on, is this two-person attribution. Is the targeted parent abusing the child, and do we need to do something to protect the child from the targeted parent? But there's another possibility, which is that the allied parent is psychologically abusing the child by creating a shared persecutory delusion and a false attachment pathology in the child for the secondary gain of manipulating the court's decisions around child custody and to meet the parent's own emotional and psychological needs. And so we have a possibility of a shared persecutory delusion and a factitious disorder imposed on another, a false attachment pathology imposed on the child, which is child psychological abuse by the allied parent. Or we have the possibility, that's a three-person attribution of causality. So where we have a triangle, it's the pathologies towards the targeted parent, but it's being caused by the allied parent, triangle, Mnuchin's triangle. Or do we have child abuse by the targeted rejected parent causing that, which is a two-person attribution of causality, two or three? So that's the differential diagnosis. Now, in the legal system, the problem that you have run into, the pathology that you've run into, is that your allies in mental health, or just the mental health people, the forensic people, have been so ignorant and incompetent, they have not given you your counter argument. So the pathology says, you're being abusive to the child. That's why the child doesn't want to be with you. Two-person attribution of causality. Well, what do you say in response? What's your allegation? That, no, I'm not doing it. You're causing the pathology. And what they gave you was this parental alienation syndrome, which is the worst possible model for a pathology ever created since the dawn of mankind. And so don't use parental alienation. There's no research for it. It's stupid. It's awful. It's crazy. Don't do that. Don't go down that road. But what do you use instead? How do you make the counter argument? Well, that's what I've done. Okay, I'm a clinical psychologist, and I have given you the professional terminology and the professional constructs so that you can make a counter argument to that. So that pathology says you're abusing the child somehow and creating the child's attachment pathology. You say, no. I'm saying it's a shared persecutory delusion and a false attachment pathology created for the secondary gain of manipulating the court. And so now you have two possibilities, either two-person attribution causality or a triangle, three-person attribution, a shared persecutory delusion. And that's what we want assessed, is both halves of that. Now, the legal system is very balanced in that, in their understanding of how they deal with litigants. And so that's going to be a model that suits well to the understanding of the court system, that you want a clinical diagnostic assessment of possible child abuse, a risk assessment of possible child abuse to the differential diagnosis appropriate to each parent. Is a targeted rejected parent abusing the child? If so, how? And I've created this scale, this parenting practices rating scale, that they can go down and identify specifically how the targeted parent is abusively maltreating the child, creating the child's attachment pathology. Or is it the allied parent who has narcissistic, borderline, dark personality spectrum traits? And are they creating a shared persecutory delusion in the child, and a false attachment pathology for the secondary gain of manipulating the court surrounding child custody and to meet their own emotional and psychological needs, one of which is potential spousal abuse using the child as a weapon. So we got a second assessment in there as well, risk assessment for possible spousal abuse, psychological abuse using the child as a weapon. So those are the two differential diagnoses, differential explanations that we need to have properly assessed in the situation. And so when you go in to make your point or to make your argument to the mental health people and the court, don't use the word parental alienation. That's going to get you into a lot of trouble. It's an attachment pathology. It's an attachment problem. It's a problem in love and bonding. The love and bonding system of the brain, you got a problem there, a pathology there. And we need to fix it. And it's not getting a parent and removing a parent from the child's life. That's not how you fix attachment pathology. That's creating attachment pathology. Now, the pathology, that's its solution, is to reject a parent from the child's life, the supposedly abusive parent. Now, if you can stop and consider for a second, the pathological allied parent is actually the abusive parent. So based on their understanding of how relationships work, once we identify them as the abusive parent, we're going to reject them and get them out of the child's and everybody's life. That's the belief system of the narcissistic, borderline, dark spectrum personalities. That once you see how damaged, once we see how damaged they are, that we are going to reject them. And sure enough, that's what you did in the divorce. Once you got married to them, then you saw how damaged they are, you rejected them. That's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy for them. So there is a reality-based fear there, but that's not what we do in families. We don't reject family members. They're family, they're family. They're dysfunctional family, but they're family. We help them get better. That's going to be that child's mom or dad for the rest of that child's life. We don't reject people. Now, if they're abusive, we have to contain that and control that, make sure the child's okay, but we fix things. We treat them, then we fix them. And so that's a fundamental difference just in the mindset that you will run into with the pathology, and that's how you begin to expose it. If you stay on a treatment narrative, we need to fix things, we need to get this treated, the pathology is going to argue against that. It's going to say, no, we don't need treatment, we just need the parent to be gone from the child's life. By presenting the counter argument of a potential shared persecutory delusion, you're now on solid ground in the legal system. They got to look at both sides of that. And they're saying you're abusive, and you're saying, no, that's delusional. That's psychotic, which it is. It's a persecutory delusion. You're not abusing the child. Here's the definition of a persecutory delusion from the American Psychiatric Association. So persecutory type is delusions that the person or someone to whom the person is close is being malevolently treated in some way. So the aligned parent and the child have this fixed and false belief, a delusion, that's maintained despite contrary evidence, that the child, someone close to the parent, is being malevolently treated in some way. Google malevolent, having or showing a wish to do evil. So we have a fixed and false belief the child's being malevolently treated in some way. Is that true? In which case, it's the two-person causality. We have child abuse by the targeted parent. Let's get it diagnosed and put it on a treatment plan and fix it. Or is it false? If it's false, how false? Is it delusionally false? And yes, it is. You can use the brief psychiatric rating scale, item 11, unusual thought content, put it on a 7-point scale, and it's probably about a 5 because of the functional impairment. There's full conviction. The child's acted on the belief is true. There's functional impairment and moderate preoccupation. It could be a 6 or a 7 if there's a lot of functional impairment and a lot of preoccupation. But we got at least a moderately severe persecutory delusion in the family. Now, the assessment for a delusional thought disorder is called a mental status exam of thought and perception. So I posted a little post today, referencing that, and you can Google mental status exam and NCBI return. It's to the National Institute of Health website, and there's a chapter from Martin on the mental status exam. And there's a bunch of them. There's a mental status exam for language and one for memory and attention and concentration. So there's all sorts of mental status exams for different brain function areas. This particular one, is called a mental status exam of thought and perception. It's a sweep of the frontal lobe executive function systems for linear logical reasoning. We're looking at the linear logical reasoning systems. We're going to do it in a very specific way. And then as we sweep the thinking system, we're going to be looking for symptoms like conceptual disorganization, that things don't kind of line up, and associational thinking, that instead of linear logical, it pops off and goes emotionally associational thinking around some things. And so the mental status exam of thought and perception doesn't look at what the content, what their belief system is. It looks at how they arrived at that belief system. Is there sufficient support for that belief? And it's looking at a specific element of the delusion, the thought disorder. And in assessing a delusion, we don't do it based on history or reporting. We actually pop it out in the session. And so we're looking at it's in the session, and we're looking at it and looking at the features, which is why we can rate it on something like the BPRS on degree of preoccupation or functional impairment, or do they have full conviction in the belief? Because we're actually looking at it in the session. And so when we do a mental status exam of thought and perception, we're looking at how the person arrives at their belief. A delusion starts with the conclusion as fixed and then constructs the evidence to match the fixed belief. And so that's what we're looking at. When we look at the evidence that's used to support it, and there's no there, because the belief is already fixed and they're constructing this. The rest of us, normal range thinking, follow the evidence to the conclusion. So we can see a linear path at how the person arrived at that. It may be wrong path, but at least there's a path by which they arrived at their beliefs. The other feature of a delusion is that when you present it with contrary evidence, it doesn't process the evidence. You see no impact of that contrary evidence on the thought process. It just sort of bounces off. It's denied or just disregarded. There's no impact from the contrary evidence. And whereas for a normal belief system, if you present contrary evidence, you at least see them processing it somehow. They come up with counter arguments, or maybe change their beliefs to some degree. You see something happening. You don't see that happening with a delusion. So the assessment of a delusional thought disorder is a mental status exam of thought and perception. And there's 3 paragraphs to Martin's description up on the web there at the National Institute of Health. First one describes sort of the domain, are we into unrealistic fears with no discernible basis in reality, exaggerations to events. So that kind of puts us in that persecutory domain. And then the 3rd paragraph is notable because it states that of all the mental health exams, the mental status exams, the mental status exam of thought and perception is one of the most difficult to conduct, and that's true. And it requires considerable experience. That's true. And so that when normal mental health people run into a possible delusional thought disorder, they typically consult with somebody who works with thought disorders because it's a little specialized kind of, it takes some training and some experience to be able to sort out what's delusional versus just what's a false kind of perception or belief about something, normal range kind of stuff. Now I have that considerable experience. I worked 12 years, a schizophrenia project, major NIMH research project, being trained annually to the head of the diagnostic unit, Brentwood VA, who are also the authors of the BPRS. So 12 years of training in the diagnostic assessment of delusional thought disorders. I know how to conduct a mental status exam of thought perception, which is why I know what it is and how this is a delusional thought disorder, and this is the assessment for it because of my training and my considerable experience. Now, the forensic psychologists out there, and even the forensic psychologists, don't have that considerable experience. Pretty much the only people that have it are the schizophrenia people, maybe bipolar with psychotic features, but it's going to be in the psychotic people. And they don't have experience about attachment pathology or family courts or family therapy or personality pathology. They're limited in their psychosis domain. That's what kind of makes me a little bit special because I have that background, but I'm also experienced in attachment pathology and personality pathology and child abuse and the family court system stuff. So the mental, that's the situation from the mental health side. Now, when you go in to ask for a proper risk assessment for possible child abuse, the reason I describe the mental status exam to you is for you to understand there's an actual assessment for this. But the mental health people that surround you don't know what it is. They don't know how to do it. And so that's a boundaries of competence issue for all of them. All of them. They should know how to do it. If the differential diagnosis is a possible persecutory delusion, you should know how to assess for a possible persecutory delusion. Otherwise, you're practicing beyond the boundaries of your competence, which they are. So, now Standard 2.01, Boundaries of Competence, says they're not allowed to do that. They can only practice within the boundaries of their competence, and they're assessing and diagnosing a delusional thought disorder. They're not competent in that. They can't do that. That's Section A. Pop down to Section B, C, and D. So C says, if they're practicing in a new domain, which they are, delusional thought disorders, and they don't want to deny, they're practicing in the new domain. Before they do that, they have to get training in that. And one of the things it mentions is consultation. So these mental health people should be getting consultation on the assessment of delusional thought disorders. If they do, though, that's going to be an acknowledgement that they're not competent. So that's where the forensic psychologists wind up in a load of trouble, because the moment they acknowledge that they don't know how to assess for a delusional thought disorder, they acknowledge that they're in violation of Standard 2.01 and have been throughout the their prior practice. But they should be consulting with this. Also, you'll note Martin's quote on the National Institute of Health website about the mental status exam being so difficult, says that people, the mental health people, often consult in the assessment of delusion. So they should really be consulting. The other piece that kind of gives them a little out is section C, which says if they're doing something work because they don't want to deny the service to somebody, so they're practicing outside the boundaries of their competence because otherwise the person's not going to get any services, and they have closely related kind of stuff, and that's your forensic people. Well, I've worked in the family courts. I've worked with this pathology. I've kind of got closely related stuff, but I don't know delusional thought disorders, the assessment of that specifically. Well, then, standard 2.01c says you can do that, but you need to take steps to get the competence, one of which is consulting. So the mental health people out there should really be consulting. Now, I've gone into such detail on this so that you kind of understand the path that's going to kind of fall out from dominoes once you make the claim or make the assertion that, no, I'm not abusing the child. That's a persecutory delusion. Now we got, you're abusing the child. You're delusional. Which one is it? Well, we need an assessment to both halves of that, so we'll get you assessed up for whether you're abusive parenting somehow, parenting practices rating scale. Let's specifically identify what it is, if that's true. If it's not true, and it's not, then let's look at the other half, delusional thought disorder. Okay, and so that's a mental status exam of thought and perception. Oh, you don't know how to do that? Well, then you need to consult with somebody. I suggest you consult with Dr. Childress because he has 6 domains of specialized expertise relevant to this, including the assessment of delusional thought disorders, attachment pathology, child abuse and complex trauma, factitious disorder imposed on another, family systems therapy, and court-involved family conflict. I ain't got them all. So I would suggest that the mental health people consult with me. But they can consult with somebody else in delusional thought disorder. They just need to do a mental status exam of thought and perception and diagnose whether or not there's a delusional thought disorder. Now, the custody evaluators, just to talk about them for a second again, they do not diagnose or treat pathology. Well, you need a treatment plan to fix this, so they are irrelevant, and you need a diagnosis for the treatment plan. And they don't diagnose, so custody evaluations are entirely irrelevant. Because even after you spend 6 to 9 months getting a custody evaluation from a forensic psychologist, you still need to get a risk assessment as to whether it's a persecutory delusion. And that's going to take like 6 weeks, maybe 4 to 6 weeks. It can take less than that, actually. And so why go through 6 to 9 months of waiting for, let's get the risk assessment right up front. Plus, this is possible child abuse. So we don't want to wait 6 to 9 months for custody evaluations. It's not even going to return a diagnosis. Let's get the risk assessment right up front from clinical psychology. We need a diagnostic clinical risk assessment. So you see how the plan is organized now? Okay. So, but now you as the consumer do not need to explain the pathology to the doctors. Okay, that's their job to know what the pathology is. You can imagine going into your doctor and saying, "Doctor, I think I might have cancer," and the doctor says, "What's that?" And you have to explain what cancer is and what how the tests for cancer and what they. No, the doctor should be explaining things to you, not you explaining things to the doctor. Shows the level of incompetence out there. So what are you going to do about this? First off, recognize this. This pathology, it's a trauma pathology. It's going to do everything in its power to destabilize you in every way possible. And so it's going to attack your identity as a parent. It's going to make false allegations about things. It's going to lie about you. It's going to threaten your relationships with your children. Your children are saying false things about you. It's going to throw you into the court. It's going to take your money, and you're not going to have enough money to fight against it because of all the expenses involved. It's going to try to destabilize you in every way possible. And it's going to make you afraid because of all these false allegations and all this chaos that's happening around you. Because it wants to make you now reactive, right? You're going to be reacting to the crisis of the day, the crisis du jour that keeps throwing up, and because you're now reactive, you don't have a plan. So the first thing you need to do is don't get locked into that. Don't trigger into your fears and your insecurities. I have to prove I'm a good parent. No, you don't. You're a good parent. Okay. You don't have to prove anything to anybody. It's a differential diagnosis. They're trying to put you on the stand and prove that you're a good parent. No, it's not a persecutory delusion. So it's two sides of the coin. I'm not proving I'm a good parent. I am a good parent. You prove it's not a persecutory delusion. And the moment you have something solid to say, not prove it's parental alienation, you get crazy. No, prove a persecutory delusion. Now you got them. You got them with something real. And so don't trigger into your fears, because when you do that, it shuts down your frontal lobe thinking systems, and that's foresight and planning ahead. You have to kind of get a plan for this. And your plan is really, really simple. You have a problem. You have a pathology. You need to fix it. You need a treatment plan. So just hold on to that. I need a treatment plan to fix the attachment pathology with my child. I love my child so much. This is wonderful. I want the child to have a wonderful life and develop normally. And this is not a normal range childhood. And the other parent is pathological, problematic. Those are two words. The other parent is problematic. The other parent is pathological. Use either one. And they're creating the pathology. They're creating the attachment problem in the child. And so we need just a proper risk assessment for possible child abuse in this situation to the appropriate differential diagnosis for each parent. So, let's get a workup for a possible persecutory delusion. Now, if the mental health person doesn't know how to assess for that, well, the closely related field, the closely related stuff, get some consultation on delusional thought disorders. Holy cow, I've written the whole book on the pathology. I've written a lot of stuff on the pathology. Now, here's a little step up that can happen with this, because the hard line is the assessment for delusional thought disorders is a mental status exam of thought and perception. Now, none of them know how to do that. I do. So because of my experience with attachment pathology and complex trauma and delusional thought disorders and all the relevant domains of knowledge, I've applied that knowledge and have come up with a set of indicators that will identify the pathology. And they're simple. Little checklist, 3 diagnostic indicators, 4 because number 2's got 2 parts, but either, attachment pathology towards a normal range parent never happens. It's an impossible symptom, but it shows up here. Children do not reject normal range parents. Then high protest behavior, either high anger, operationally defined as 5 narcissistic personality symptoms in the child. Narcissistic personality disorder is an adult pathology. It's not a child pathology. That's an inauthentic symptom as well. Or high anxiety, operationally defined as a phobic level anxiety towards a parent, a mother phobia or a father phobia. That too that's an impossible symptom. There's no cases ever of a mother phobia or a father phobia. That's an inauthentic symptom. And number 3 is a persecutory delusion displayed by the child towards a normal range parent. That's also an impossible symptom. Children do not develop persecutory delusions towards normal range parents. And so we got 3 impossible symptoms, and all 3 of those symptoms, though, will be present in this pathology because this pathology is not real. It's an artificially created, a factitious disorder attachment disorder, attachment pathology, imposed on the child for the secondary gain of manipulating the court and meeting the parent's own needs. A factitious disorder imposed on another. Okay, that's what the pathology is. Shared persecutory delusion, factitious disorder imposed on another child, psychological abuse. That's a set of constellation of diagnoses over there, and you add in the narcissistic borderline dark personality pathology. So it's just like a nice little unit, a coherent unit of pathology that explains it. Now, in addition to the 3 diagnostic indicators, I also used all my knowledge and all this information of professional psychology to identify a set of 12 associated clinical signs. Now, the 3 diagnostic indicators, they'll show up 100% of the time. And if you find one, you'll find all 3 because it's coherent set. And I can make the diagnosis off of any one of those because all 3 of those are there. But I wanted to make it easier for the mental health people, a little more reassuring for them, that rather than a single symptom diagnosis. So you'll just see the whole pattern there on that. But in addition, those 3 will show up all the time. The associated clinical signs are associated symptoms, but don't show up in every case. It'll show up a lot, but not every time. So they're not diagnostic, and they might show up in other situations, but you'll get 1 or 2, but not a lot of them. So if you start getting a high frequency of the associated clinical signs, the ACS, then that's additional support. So now you not only have the 3 diagnostic indicators indicating the pathology, but you've got a cloud of these other associated signs that are also indicating the pathology. It just anchors far more the diagnostic certainty on this. And notice, none of this involves a mental status exam of thought and perception. So I'm not having to go in and do that. What I'm doing is I'm diagnosing the symptom features. So I'm just cataloging the symptom features. Here's all the symptom features. And then based on that, there's only one possible explanation for that set of symptoms. And that's because I've applied my knowledge. You can try it out, try to find anything else that matches it. No, you won't find anything. Now, interestingly, I want to share with you a little bit. Dorsey's been collecting tagging, coding for the diagnostic indicators and the associated clinical signs in her custody resolution method, identifying these symptoms for the court, saying if these symptoms are present, there's only one possible cause, and she does it from the data that's generated around these families, from years of custody conflict. She looks at all the data. She does what's called a content analysis. It's a qualitative research method of data coding, data tagging, to develop categories. She's developed the categories for the 3 diagnostic indicators and 12 associated clinical signs. And I'm working collaboratively on a paper because we've got some of that data that looks at the associated clinical signs. And it's really interesting. So the cutoff point, my hypothesis was we'd have at least 4 or higher of these ACS whenever the 3 diagnostic indicators were present. Yes, we do. Oh my goodness, we get at least 5 or higher in every one of the families. And then we looked at the prevalence of each of the diagnostic indicators. And the excessive texting was at 30%. Everybody else is over 50%. And 9 of the symptoms are over 80% present. Within 80% of the time, one of these diagnostic indicators are present in the families. Oh, wow, that's pretty good. I nailed these symptom indicators pretty well. And each one of them reflects the application of a different feature. So you can kind of understand the various pathology lines based on the frequencies that these are showing up. So it's very, very interesting data. And this is just the first to come out. This is just exploratory stuff. And it's based on documented data, archival data. So all the reports and emails and all that kind of stuff, as opposed to actual clinical interviews. And these are clinical symptoms. So yeah, if you get a clinical psychologist doing the rating for whether these three diagnostic indicators are present and how many of the associated clinical signs are present, check, 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 check. It's 30 seconds. And you have a nice little symptom workup for the pathology. I think it should be done routinely. Piece of cake. Routinely complete the diagnostic checklist for pathogenic parenting. The 12 associated clinical signs is page 3, and the parenting practices rating scale. Between the two of those, parenting practices rating scale says it's a normal range parent or an abusive range parent. Level 1 or 2 is abusive range. Level 3 or 4 is normal range. And then diagnostic indicators, 3 impossible symptoms are present, plus, 5, 6, 7 of the associated clinical signs. Boom, you've nailed the pathology. It is a shared persecutory delusion created by a narcissistic, borderline dark personality parent for the secondary gain of manipulating the court's decisions regarding child custody and to meet the parent's own emotional and psychological needs. And so that way, these mental health people don't necessarily need to learn a mental status exam of thought and perception and can do a BPRS rating for the scale, although they should, and they should do both. But it's a scaffolding support for them based on the application of my knowledge. Or they can do a mental status exam and then consult with somebody who knows how to do a mental status exam like me. And so it's kind of a circular kind of thing. All roads lead back to kind of listening to Dr. Childress because I'm applying knowledge that they don't have. So that's the broad nutshell, deep dive into the broad nutshell. Going back to just the surface kind of what are you going to do about it? It's really, really simple. You have a problem. There's a pathology. You need to fix the problem. You need to treat the pathology. The problem is an attachment pathology, an attachment problem between a parent and a child. So we need to fix that. That's not fixed by eliminating a parent. That's attachment pathology. It's fixed by restoring a healthy and normal range bond. But in order to do that, in order to come up with a treatment plan for that, we have to identify, diagnose which parent is causing the child's attachment pathology. Is it the targeted rejected parent who's abusively maltreating the child, creating the child's attachment pathology towards that parent? In which case, let's identify what the abuse is, put it on a treatment plan, and fix it and restore a healthy attachment bond to that parent. Or that's a two-person attribution of causality. Or is it a three-person attribution, a triangle? And is it a shared persecutory delusion and false attachment pathology imposed on the child for the secondary gain of manipulating the court's decisions around child custody and to meet the parent's own emotional and psychological needs? There's your differential diagnosis. That's what we need. Don't go wandering off into stray, made-up pathologies, resist, refuse, or parental alienation, or all those other made-up kind of things. Stay grounded in real world. Now, given that, let me give you another description for the pathology that's involved, for the problem that's involved. So that's your legal thing, shared persecutory delusion. Let me give you another way of talking about it just more generally. Okay, this is the pathology, and it's going to be the family systems approach. And so we're going to use the constructs out of family systems to describe what's going on. And so again, language, you're controlling the narrative. The pathology wants to control the narrative and say, you're an abusive parent and not the child's being victimized and I'm the protective parent. So they get that little trauma reenactment narrative. victimized child, abusive parent, protective parent. You want to control the narrative. No, no, no. That's delusional. It's a persecutory delusion and false attachment pathology. Here's the other language you can use to control the narrative: that the child is being triangulated into the spousal conflict through the formation of a cross-generational coalition with the allied parent against the targeted parent, creating an emotional cutoff in the child's attachment bond to the targeted parent because of enmeshment and an inverted hierarchy. So that's the description. So you got a triangle, cross-generational coalition, and emotional cutoff. Now, Mnuchin's diagram, there's a structural family diagram for specifically this concern. So that's when you anchor yourself in this description, you get Mnuchin's diagram, and you can just kind of show it to people and say this. Pay particular attention to the 3 lines between the father and the son up on the parent hierarchy line. That's the enmeshment, a psychological fusion. So when you use the things like psychological control or brainwashing, don't use brainwashing, but that's what you're referring to, enmeshment. It's a psychological fusion of states. And then the other thing that's useful about the diagram is that you'll notice that the son, the child, is elevated on the same hierarchy line with the father, and that's the parent hierarchy line, whereas the mother is down on the child line on this, as opposed to being up with the father on the parent line with the child down below. That's called an inverted hierarchy, where the child is being empowered by the alliance or the coalition with the father to judge the adequacy of the mother, as if the child were a parent and the mother were the child. And that's the switch in that role, that hierarchy line. So when you use this family systems description, you get the inverted hierarchy and enmeshment. And some wonderful quotes from Carrig and Mnuchin talk about a highly enmeshed relationship on one side creates detachment or disengagement on the other. And so that's what we have, a highly enmeshed relationship and emotional cutoff from the other parent. And the child who's judging you because you didn't take him to McDonald's and all that entitled stuff, that your child's judging you as if you're the child and they're the parent, your adequacy, you didn't do this right or didn't do that. All of those are now symptoms of an inverted hierarchy. So rather than having to defend yourself against 1,000 of these stupid little things, they all get categorized into an inverted hierarchy symptom as part of the coalition. And you got the enmeshment and you got the coalition. And a classic feature of the coalition, the cross-generational coalition, is the allied parent empowers the child to reject the other parent, but then claims incompetence. And he goes, what can I do? I can't influence the child. It's the child's own decisions. I can't do anything about the parentally incompetent. And that's true of cross-generational coalitions throughout pathology, school-based pathology, juvenile justice system. Wherever you run into these cross-generational coalitions, these triangles, you're going to find that the parental incompetency. What can I do? I can't change with the child and with the allied parent. So you'll find that over here as well. So that's, what are you going to do about it? Don't get destabilized. Take a deep breath. You're a fine parent. Develop a plan. What are you going to do about this? Now, each one of you is going to be in a different stage. So some of you are early entry, some of you are in the middle in the courts, some of you are with now adult children. And some of you have 1 children, some of you have multiple children, and then there's all sorts of layers of complexity on this. So you're going to have to adjust or modify or apply the information, the plan, to your specifics of the situation. But the core feature is to turn this from everybody looking at you as the problem, as a potential. Let's evaluate you as to whether you're abusive and micromanage your parenting and see what we can do, because we're doing a two-person causal attribution, to saying, nope, it's a persecutory delusion. Now you are making an allegation against them that they have to defend against. That's a person. No, this is delusional, and I'm a fine parent. Now we need to find which side of that's true, and that's perfect for the legal system. That should be a nice argument for the legal system to manage. But the legal system is going to have to come back with an order or request to get that assessed, and then you're going to wind up with trouble, because the incompetence and failure of the mental health system for the last 40 years in forensic psychology, you're going to run into that. But you can navigate out of that if you stay in the clinical psychology people, and get proper assessments, or if the forensic people will rely on Dr. Childress and the 3 diagnostic indicators, 12 associate clinical signs, and parenting practices rating scale, and start using my knowledge and expertise. Or they can consult with me on a mental status exam of thought and perception, or they can consult with somebody else on a mental status exam of thought and perception. But we need to get that properly diagnosed. So a lot of what I'm giving you in my Facebook posts is the phrasing, the words you can use, the sentences you can use to describe the pathology, to describe what you want. One of the things I've posted just over the last couple of days is a number of slides from an upcoming talk I'll be giving. And so I'm preparing. It's a 2-hour talk, and so I'm preparing to do these little talks, 2 hours. In this case, it's for continuing education for attorneys, so it's adjusted a little bit to the court. And I anticipate I would like to be doing more of those sorts of things, of talking to attorneys and the court system about how they handle the situation, what their expectations should be. And fundamentally, in all cases of custody conflict where there's attachment pathology between a child and a parent, all of them, we need to get a proper risk assessment for possible child abuse to the appropriate differential diagnosis for each parent. Is the targeted parent abusing the child, two-person attribution, or is the allied parent creating a shared persecutory delusion and psychologically abusing the child to manipulate the court? So which is it? And that's the question we need answered on this. So that empowers you then to not get on the defensive, and to take charge of the situation, take charge of the narrative. What do you do specifically to stabilize your child during this process or during this situation? I think Dorsey has a lot of good advice on that. Dorsey's higher purpose parenting course would be my recommended to get kind of ground on how to handle that. But basically, don't believe the false child. There's one of the metaphors I use to describe what needs to happen. I use a musical metaphor that the pathological parent is playing like Sousa marches. Da, 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 da. And Sousa marches, boy, they are very marchable. You hear them and you just want to start marching. And so, mom's bad parent, she doesn't deserve children. And mom's bad parent, she doesn't deserve children. I'm a good parent, I deserve children. And everybody's doing the Sousa march because it's such a marchable thing. But what we need you to be doing like dancing. We need you playing waltzes and Mozart and stuff, not Sousa marches. But that means we need to get you out of that trauma resonant, is what I call it, out of that trauma place that you're in, where you're participating in that narrative, and get you up in a different place doing music and waltzes. And one of the ways I recommend doing that is a lot more smiling. We just add a happier place onto that. And no matter what you're feeling, what the brain chemical feeling that you have in your brain, if you smile, you're going to add happy to it. You can just hear the change in my voice, and everything relaxes and everything. And so it's just a nice way to approach life is to just keep a little smile, a little background, because it's a confidence that there's no danger, there's no threat. Happy indicates no danger, no threat. And so by staying in this place of there's no danger, I'm confident we're going to work it, that's very reassuring to the child, who's very also destabilized by the divorce, by all the relationships, and they're getting all these mixed messages and don't know what to do. That's okay, we're going to work it out. That's okay, we're going to work it out. Don't try to explain to the child cognitively what's going on and you're in alliance with, no, it's not going to work. I'll talk about the pathology in children later or something, but that's not going to work. Don't try to enlighten them to the pathology. There's a variety of reasons why that's not a good idea. What you want to do is you want to hold on to your perception of reality as the waltzing, the music, the dancing. No, you're fine. You're a good parent, and everything's fine. The child's a little mixed up, and we're gonna work it out. We're gonna handle it, and then move it into the mental health system that you want an accurate diagnosis on this, and let the mental health people come up to support you on this. And that's what we need to activate. We need to activate the mental health people around you to support you. Dorsey can do a lot of stuff with her coaching and her skill sets and a lot of stuff like that. But fundamentally, diagnosing pathology, identifying problems, that's the job of the mental health people. That's our role. And so we got a clear differential diagnosis. And in 100% of the cases in family courts, the family courts just need to pop them right back out to get a proper risk assessment. And once we get the knowledge in here, and once we get doing this, the turnaround on that should be around 4 to 6 weeks for around $2,500 to maybe $5,000, depending upon complexity. But yeah, 4 to 6 weeks for $5,000 is a whole lot better than 6 to 9 months for $20,000 to $40,000 of forensic people on this. So let's get that right up front. Difficulty is you got no mental health people over here to do that. So let's get the clinical people back. We need to make it safe for them, and there's ways we can do that. Ultimately, diagnosis guides treatment. Ultimately, this is the product of a narcissistic, borderline, dark personality, dark triad, vulnerable dark triad, dark tetrad. And so the treatment for that is going to be dialectic behavior therapy, DBT, modified for the family courts, because DBT is designed to treat borderline personality pathology. And in this case, we're treating the consequences of the pathology, borderline, narcissistic, dark spectrum. So it's going to be DBT adapted to the courts. The cognitive behavioral component of DBT is an irrational beliefs kind of component, adjusted slightly, is going to be excellent for the delusional component. The mindfulness component is going to be great for the trauma element and the stress that's in the family, giving the child skills to cope with that. And getting the diagnosis of child psychological abuse will be able to stabilize our understanding of the pathology so that we're not constantly chasing symptoms. And I worked foster care, and it's important to get that to diagnosis of child abuse and for the parent. For their self-reflective insight. They need to hear that we consider their parenting abusive range, so that they absorb that in terms of self-reflective insight necessary to make the changes. If they don't understand that, they're going to continue to do what they do and continue to abuse the child. So with all of that, I'm going to wrap up my Sunday talk with you, and we'll meet next week and talk about something else. All right. Bye-bye, everybody.